In a packed Kentucky courtroom, a 75-year-old woman faces a judge's scorn after defending a young man's fate. Mocked as a meddling granny, she stuns all with a razor-sharp legal mind, dismantling a shaky case with laws and rights he can't refute. As the judge's smirk fades, her wisdom shifts justice's course. But who is she? And what's next? A tale of grit, revelation, and a fight that echoes beyond the gavel, leaving you wondering where her voice will strike again. The courtroom in Boone County, Kentucky, a rural enclave where the Ohio River traced a serpentine path through rolling hills, smelled of old wood polish and stale coffee on a crisp fall morning. The kind where frost lingered on the grass outside, glinting like shattered glass in the early light, and breath fogged in wisps before dissipating into the chill. The gallery buzzed with locals, their heavy boots scuffing the worn oak floor, its planks warped and darkened by decades of footsteps, their whispers a low hum beneath the ceiling's peeling paint, its once cream color flaking like autumn leaves caught in a breeze. The benches creaked under their weight, farmers in faded flannel shirts, their hands rough from tobacco fields, retirees clutching thermoses of bitter brew, their faces etched with years of sun and wind. A few teenagers dragged along by parents, their sneakers squeaking as they shifted restlessly, all craning to see the day's drama unfold in a space that felt both timeless and tired. At the front, behind a scuffed walnut bench scarred by decades of gavels and spilled ink, sat Judge Harlan Embry, 82, his white hair thinning to fragile wisps that caught the fluorescent glow, his jowls sagging beneath a face carved with lines of authority and weariness, his black robe a shroud over a frame bent by years of rulings, its fabric frayed at the hem from constant wear. His voice, gravelly and sharp, cut through the hum as he peered over his wire-rimmed glasses, their lenses smudged with fingerprints, at the defendant's table. His gavel resting like a scepter in his gnarled hand, its handle worn smooth from countless strikes. Eleanor Grayson, 75, stood there, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun, strands glinting like polished steel under the harsh lights. Her plaid coat frayed at the cuffs, but meticulously patched with careful stitches, a testament to thrift and pride. Her posture stayed steady, despite the weight of every eye in the room, her slight frame belying a quiet strength. Her hands clasped loosely before her, knuckles knotted with age but calm. Her hazel eyes, sharp behind faint crow's feet, surveyed the scene, unyielding, composed, a quiet storm brewing beneath her weathered surface, a depth that belied her modest appearance. She'd been hauled in for contempt, a charge sparked the day before when she'd leapt to her feet in this same courtroom, her voice piercing the stale air in defense of a young man, Tommy Haskins, 22, accused of stealing a watch he swore he didn't take. Embry banged his gavel now, its thud a sharp crack that silenced the room, the sound bouncing off the paneled walls adorned with faded portraits of stern-faced judges past, their eyes seeming to judge the present from their dusty frames. "Mrs. Grayson, you think you can disrupt my court and lecture me?" he barked, his smirk twisting, his bushy brows rising in mock amusement, his tone dripping with condescension, honed by decades of unchallenged rule. "What's next? Teaching us the Constitution from your rocking chair, old lady? Maybe reciting the Declaration while you're at it?" Laughter rippled through the gallery, nervous chuckles from the retirees, a guffaw from a burly farmer in the back, a snicker from a teen texting under the bench. Eleanor's eyes narrowed, a flicker of steel flashing within them, but her lips pressed into a thin line, her silence a shield against the jab, her composure a wall he couldn't yet breach. The public defender, Ben Tate, a frazzled kid in his late 20s with a cheap gray suit that hung loose on his lanky frame and a mop of brown hair falling into his eyes, stood beside Tommy, papers slipping from his trembling hands to scatter on the table in a chaotic cascade. "She meant no harm, Your Honor," he stammered, his voice cracking like a boy's, his tie askew from nervous tugging, his glasses fogging slightly with anxious sweat. Embry snorted, a harsh puff of air that fogged his glasses briefly, his smirk widening into a grimace of disdain. She's lucky I don't lock her up. Sit down, old lady. Let the lawyers talk, such as they are in this sorry excuse for a defense. His faded blue eyes glinted with scorn, his gavel tapping the bench in a lazy rhythm, a king dismissing a peasant. Eleanor's voice came low, calm, cutting through the tension like a blade through silk, resonant and unexpected. I'll stand, thank you. And I'll speak. The room stilled, the laughter dying in throats, the gallery's hum fading to a hush, as if the air itself held its breath. Embry's smirk faltered, his gavel twitching in his grip as he stared at her, caught off guard by the steel in her tone, the quiet defiance in her stance, a challenge he hadn't anticipated from this frail figure in a threadbare coat. Chapter 2. The Calm Before the Tempest. Eleanor had been a spectator the previous day, a gray figure in the back row, her plaid coat blending into the sea of flannel, until Tommy's case began to crumble like a house of cards in a gust of wind. Ben Tate had floundered from the start, his opening statement a jumble of half-formed thoughts, missing objections as the prosecutor, Lila Hayes, a sharp woman in her 40s with a sleek chestnut bob and a tailored navy suit, piled on shaky evidence. A blurry security still showing a figure in a hoodie near the shop. A cop's testimony about finding the watch in Tommy's pocket. No witnesses to the theft itself. No fingerprints tying it to him. Tommy had muttered under his breath, "I didn't do it. I was at the gas station buying smokes," his voice a desperate plea. But Ben let it slide. His notes a mess of scribbles and coffee stains. His defense a sieve leaking holes. Eleanor had watched, her hands tightening on her purse, her lips thinning, until she could bear it no longer. She'd risen then, frail but fierce, her voice ringing out across the room. "This boy's railroaded, where's the proof? You're burying him with nothing but guesses." The gallery had gasped, a collective intake of breath. Embry had slammed his gavel, face reddening beneath his white hair, his voice booming, "Order! You're out, ma'am, contempt!" Deputies had escorted her out, their hands gentle but firm on her arms, her glare fixed on Embry as she went, unbowed, her plaid coat swaying with each determined step. Now, given a chance to explain herself before sentencing on the contempt charge, she seized it like a lifeline, her voice a beacon in the dim room, her plaid coat swaying faintly as she squared her shoulders, her silver bun catching the light. "Your Honor," she began, her tone steady, resonant, filling the space with a quiet authority that belied her age. "I disrupted to protect a right Tommy's right to a fair trial. The Sixth Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees a fair defense, and he's not getting it from this." She gestured at Ben, her hand sweeping with a precision that cut, Ben flushing a deep scarlet, his papers slipping further as he fumbled to gather them, his glasses sliding down his nose. Embry leaned back in his chair, chuckling, a dry rasp that grated like sandpaper on wood, his amusement a shield. "You a lawyer now, Granny? Stick to knitting or bingo leave the law to us who've earned it." The gallery tittered, a few nervous laughs echoing. Mrs. Jenkins, a retiree with a thermos, stifled a giggle. A farmer named Clyde barked a guffaw. Eleanor's gaze hardened, her hazel eyes glinting like polished stone under the lights, unyielding against the mockery. "No degree, sir," she said, her voice rising slightly, firm but measured. "But I know the law, studied it 50 years. Books and cases. Night after night when the world slept. Kentucky, revised statutes. Section 421.500 right to competent counsel. This defense ain't that, and you're letting it slide. Letting a boy's life slip through the cracks." Ben's face went from scarlet to ashen, his hands trembling as he clutched his notes. Embry's laugh died abruptly, his smirk twisting into a scowl, his gavel tapping the bench in irritation, a staccato beat of frustration. "Your out-of-line contempt's no game, and you're playing with fire," he snapped, his voice rising, his jowls quivering with indignation. "Am I?" she countered, her tone unshaken, her words deliberate, each one landing like a stone in still water. "Fourth Amendment unlawful search and seizure. That stolen watch they pinned on Tommy? No warrant, no chain of custody. Officer Watts testified it was found in his pocket after a pat down on a hunch. No probable cause, no exigent circumstances. Evidence is tainted, inadmissible, shouldn't even be here. While the room hushed, a collective breath held, the gallery's whispers falling silent, as if the words had sucked the air from their lungs. Embry's pen froze mid-scribble, his jowls quivering as he stared at her, his faded blue eyes widening slightly, caught off guard. Tommy's eyes widened too, his thin frame straightening in his chair. He'd claimed the cops planted it. A frantic whisper to Ben that had gone nowhere, dismissed as panic. Lila shifted in her seat, her sleek bob catching the light as she rifled her notes, with a faint rustle, her sharp features tightening. Ben gaped, papers trembling in his grip, a deer caught in headlights, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly, his defense unraveling before him. Eleanor pressed on, her voice a steady drumbeat, her frail hands gesturing with a precision that belied her years. Each movement deliberate, each word a brick in a wall of reason. U.S. Constitution, Article 6, Supremacy Clause. Federal law trumps your haste, Your Honor, trumps this rush to judgment. Brady v. Maryland, 1963 prosecution, must disclose exculpatory evidence, anything that might clear the accused. Where's the security tape from the gas station on Route 8 showing Tommy elsewhere when this supposed theft went down? He says he was there. Where's the proof you checked? The gallery murmured, heads turning, a ripple of shock spreading misses. Jenkins clutched her thermos tighter. Clyde leaned forward, his flannel rustling. Lila Hayes shifted again, her pen tapping her pad in a nervous rhythm, her voice tight as she rose. We, didn't obtain it. Didn't think it was relevant at the time. Eleanor's brow arched, a faint smile tugging her lips, her hazel eyes glinting with quiet triumph. Negligence or intent to bury the truth. That tape's material, potentially exculpatory, and you've withheld it. Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 16, discovery obligation violation right there. Embry slammed his gavel, face reddening beneath his thinning hair, his voice a growl that shook the bench. Enough. You're not counsel here. You're a spectator with a big mouth and a bigger imagination. The wood cracked under the blow, a sharp echo reverberating off the walls, rattling the portraits. Eleanor stood unflinching, her plaid coat swaying slightly, her composure a fortress. Then appoint me, she shot back, her voice rising just enough, calm but unyielding, a steel thread woven through her words. Kentucky Rule of Professional Conduct 3.130 pro bono representation if needed, permissible with court approval. I'll defend him better than this kid's fumbling, he's drowning, and Tommy's sinking with him, Ben stammered, his face a mask of panic, papers sliding to the floor in a chaotic flurry. Embry glared, his glasses slipping down his nose, his faded blue eyes narrowing to slits. You're dreaming, woman. I'd sooner let a mule argue a case than you, he said, his tone venomous, his smirk creeping back like a reflex, a shield against her audacity. Try me, she replied, her eyes locking his, a dare wrapped in composure, her hands steady at her sides, her silver bun glinting, as she tilted her head slightly, unflinching under his stare. The gallery's murmurs, swelled shock, awe, a few gasps rippling through. Clyde's jaw dropping, Mrs. Jenkins whispering to her neighbor, she's got guts. Embry hesitated, his gavel hovering mid-air, his jaw working as he weighed her words, his pride a fortress crumbling at the edges, warring with a flicker of curiosity, a begrudging spark in his faded eyes. The room held its breath, a taut string stretched to snapping. Lila's pen stilled, her sharp eyes darting between them, her fingers tightening on her notes. Tommy leaned forward, hope flickering in his pale face, his thin hands gripping the table's edge. Finally, Embry growled, his voice low, begrudging. A concession dragged from him. Proceed. Prove you're a fool, Mrs. Grayson. But one misstep, one stumble, and you're done. Back to the gallery or the cell, your choice. He leaned back, arms crossing over his chest. His smirk, a thin veneer over unease. His gavel settling with a soft thud, a reluctant surrender. Eleanor took over, stepping to the defendant's table with a quiet grace. Her plaid coat, a stark contrast to Ben's rumpled suit as she faced Tommy, her voice softening, a gentle prod beneath her steel. "Tell me again, where were you when they say you stole that watch from the pawn shop?" Tommy, wiry and pale, his black hair a mess over his forehead, spoke, his voice shaky but clear, his words spilling out in a rush. "At the gas station on Route 8. Buying smokes clerk knows me. Cameras there. I swear I was nowhere near Main Street that night." His hands trembled slightly, his eyes darting to Eleanor, a lifeline glimpsed. Eleanor turned to Lila, her tone crisp, cutting through the room. "Produce that tape or drop this farce now. It's an alibi, potentially clears him, and you've sat on it, ignored it." Lila objected, rising swiftly, her sleek bob swaying as she gripped her notes. "Irrelevant, speculative, no proof it exists." Her voice cracked slightly, her composure fraying at the edges. Eleanor's response was swift, her voice rising, firm. "Material alibi evidence, potentially exculpatory, directly contradicts your timeline. Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 16. Discovery obligation prosecution must disclose anything that might aid the defense. And suppress the watch while you're at it. Fruit of the Poisonous Tree. Wong Sun, Ver, United States, 1963. No lawful search. No admissibility. Officer Watts had no warrant. No cause beyond a hunch." Torres's eyes narrowed, a glint of interest sparking behind her glasses. Embry's gavel hovered, his scowl deepening, his fingers tightening on the handle. Lila fumbled, her notes rustling as she flipped pages. "We'll check the tape. Need time to locate it, verify." Her voice wavered, her sharp features tightening with strain. Eleanor didn't pause, her momentum a tide, calling Officer Dale Watts to the stand. A burly man in his 30s with a buzz cut and a swagger, his uniform crisp, his boots thudding as he climbed up. "Warrant for the search that found the watch?" Watts shifted, his broad shoulders squaring. "No, got a tip he had it. Anonymous call, patted him down on the street." "Lawful basis for that pat-down?" "Exigent circumstances, public safety. Could have been armed," he said, his voice gruff, his jaw set. "Lies plain view doctrine fails without legal entry justification," Eleanor snapped, her voice rising, her plaid coat swaying as she pointed a steady finger, citing Coolidge Vers, New Hampshire, 1971 with the ease of a seasoned scholar. "No exigency, a hunch isn't probable cause. No immediate threat. No weapon suspected. Fourth Amendment, clear as day, search was unlawful. Watch is out." Watts squirmed, his hands clenching the rail, his buzz cut glinting with sweat. Lila objected, her voice sharp. "Argumentative counsel's badgering." Embry overruled, his voice tight, grudging. "Let her finish, she's digging her hole, or so she thinks." "Go on, Mrs. Grayson." Eleanor grilled Watts further, her tone relentless. "Chain of custody. Where's the log for that watch?" "Tagged it later at the station," he muttered, his eyes darting to Lila. "Later? Evidence Rules 901 authentication fails without a continuous record. Planted or sloppy, either way, it's inadmissible, unreliable." The gallery whispered, a ripple of unease spreading. Clyde's jaw tightened. Mrs. Jenkins clutched her purse. Embry's pen scratched, his earlier smirk gone, his faded eyes narrowing as he watched her work. Days unfolded. Eleanor dismantling the case with a precision that stunned. Her voice a steady drumbeat echoing off the walls, her plaid coat swaying as she moved between table and stand, a figure of quiet command. She called the gas station clerk, Carl Withers, a wiry man in his 50s with a stained apron and a gravelly voice, who confirmed under oath. "Tommy bought smokes. 8:15 p.m. I rung him up. Cameras caught it. He's in every week. Boy." The tape surfaced after Lila's scramble hours of pressure from Eleanor, forcing a reluctant call to the station owner. Blurry, but clear on the courtroom screen. Tommy at the counter, time-stamped miles from the pawn shop. A pack of Marlboros in his hand. The clerk's bored nod sealing his alibi. Eleanor cross-examined Lila's witness, the pawn shop owner, Mr. Shorter Ellis, a balding man with a nervous tic. You saw him take it? Not clear dark, quick, figure in a hoodie, couldn't swear it was him, he admitted, his voice faltering under her steady gaze. No positive ID, no proof your case collapses right there, she said, her tone a quiet hammer, her hands resting on the table, steady as stone. Embry watched, silent now, his earlier mockery fading into a tight-lipped frown, his hands clasped tight on the bench, his gavel still as if forgotten. Lila, cornered, rose, her sleek bob disheveled from running her hands through it. State moves to dismiss evidence insufficient. We can't proceed. Her voice was clipped, her sharp features drawn. Tommy was freed, his shackles clinking as deputies released him, his thin arms trembling as he stood, his eyes wet with relief, his mop of hair falling over a grin. On the contempt charge, Eleanor turned to Embry, her voice softening but firm. First Amendment speech, even disruptive, protects justice when it's at stake. Kentucky Revised Statutes, Section 524.04. Intent matters, and mine was right, not malice. I spoke for a boy's life, not to defy you. Embry, chastened, leaned back, his faded blue eyes softening, a flicker of awe, regret, a humbling dawn breaking over his weathered face. His voice came low, almost a whisper. Dismissed contempt charge dropped. You've made your point, Mrs. Grayson. The gallery erupted, applause swelling like a river breaking its banks, gasps mingling with cheers, Clyde's whoop piercing the din, Mrs. Jenkins clapping her thermos against her knee, tears glinting in her eyes. Embry stared at Eleanor, his gavel still, his jowls quivering faintly as he rasped, "Who are you, woman? Where'd you come from with all this?" She smiled faintly, her hazel eyes glinting with a quiet pride, her voice gentle but resonant. "Just a widow who reads? My husband was a lawyer, taught me at his knee, 50 years of books and cases, nights by the fire with law as my companion after he passed." The room hushed, a reverent silence falling. Embry's jowls quivered again, his eyes dropping to his hands. A man, humbled by a force he hadn't seen coming, a reckoning in plaid. Outside, Boone County buzzed under a sky streaked with gold and crimson, the fall air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves and river dampness. Tommy hugged Eleanor, his thin arms trembling around her frail frame, his voice cracking with thanks. "You saved me, ma'am. I'd be gone without you." Bob. Locals gathered, whispering her name like a legend. That Grayson woman, sharp as a tack, tougher than nails, their voices carrying down Main Street, past the pawn shop, the gas station, the barber shop where old men nodded over coffee. Embry retired weeks later, humbled, his bench taken by a younger judge with less bluster, his exit quiet. Whispers trailing him. Some said Eleanor's stand broke him, others that he'd seen his time was up. She walked home to her cottage on the riverbank, its porch sagging under the weight of years, its windows framed by wild roses climbing the clapboard, their thorns glinting in the dusk. Law books stacked high on every shelf, yellowed tomes of statutes, case law, a lifetime study piled beside a rocking chair, where she'd read through countless nights, her husband's voice, a memory guiding her hand across pages. She sat, gazing at the Ohio River, its waters glinting under the setting sun, its current slow but relentless, a mirror to her thoughts. How many more Tommies waited, trapped by weak counsel, crooked systems, voices unheard in courts across the hills and beyond? How many judges wielded gavels like scepters, deaf to the law's call? She'd teach, she decided, law to those who would listen, kids like Tommy with lives to reclaim, neighbors with fights to win, her kitchen table a classroom, her books cracked open under lamplight. The horizon stretched wide, the river's bend hiding what lay beyond, its waters whispering secrets, questions lingering, unanswered. Who else would she save? What battles loomed in quiet towns, shadowed halls, places where justice flickered but hadn't yet flared. Justice shone that day, a beacon from her stand. But its reach remained a mystery, a thread she'd pull as long as breath held. Her books open, her voice ready, the river flowing on, endless and uncharted. Thank you all for watching this video. Please comment and let me know what you think about this story. Please like and subscribe to watch more great content on my channel.